Picture the year 1851. London has just opened the doors to the greatest exhibition the world has ever seen. The Great Exhibition. Over 14,000 displays from 40 countries, all packed inside a single palace made entirely of glass and iron. And at the center of it all, Britain, their machines, their steel, their genius. 6 million people walked through those doors in just 5 months, and every single one of them left thinking the same thing: that Britain wasn't just the most powerful nation on earth. Britain was the future. And you know what? They were right. In 1851, Britain produced more than half of the world's iron, more than half of the world's cotton cloth. Its navy controlled every major ocean. Its currency, the pound sterling, was the language of global money. No country had ever built anything like it. No country had even come close. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a country called America was still figuring out how to build a railroad that didn't fall apart in the rain. So here's what nobody tells you. 70 years after that exhibition, just 70 years, Britain came to America hat in hand, begging for money just to feed its own people. The most powerful empire in human history, broke, desperate, and asking its former colony for a lifeline. This is the story of the greatest economic upset in human history. And if you pay close attention, you're going to start seeing pieces of it happening again, right now, with different players in much higher stakes. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand how Britain lost, you first have to feel how completely, almost arrogantly, it won. By 1870, the British Empire controlled nearly a quarter of all the land on Earth, 25% of the globe's surface, 400 million people, 1 in every 4 humans alive, lived under the British Crown. The phrase, "the empire on which the sun never sets," wasn't poetry written by some proud aristocrat in a drawing room. It was just geography, literally true. And the engine behind all of that power was one thing: industry. Britain had done something no civilization in human history had ever managed. It figured out how to replace human muscle with machine power on a massive industrial scale. The steam engine, the spinning jenny, the power loom. One by one, Britain invented the tools that defined the modern world, and for nearly a century, it had absolutely no competition. By the mid-1800s, Britain was producing 1/3 of the world's entire manufactured output. Think about that. One country on an island smaller than the state of Oregon, making 1/3 of everything the entire world used. The man who represented all of this, who was Britain in many ways, was a textile mill owner named Richard Arkwright Jr. His father had invented the water frame, one of the core machines that started the whole revolution. Richard Jr. turned that invention into a dynasty. His mills ran around the clock, employed thousands of workers, and shipped finished cloth to every corner of the globe. He was wealthy beyond imagination. He was respected. He was completely, totally certain that the world he lived in was permanent. He was not an unusual man. He was the usual man. Among Britain's industrial elite, that level of confidence, that bone-deep certainty that Britain had cracked the code of history, was simply the air they breathed. And why wouldn't they be? The Bank of England had been operating since 1694, 150 years of accumulated financial wisdom quietly setting the rhythm of global money. The pound sterling was so trusted that merchants in Buenos Aires, Bombay, and Bangkok all priced their goods in it. If you wanted to do serious business anywhere on Earth, you needed pounds. You kept your reserves in London banks. You borrowed from London financiers. London wasn't just a city. London was the operating system of the entire global economy. And behind every trade route, every colonial agreement, every debt repayment, sat the Royal Navy, the most powerful military force the world had ever assembled. Britain didn't just trade with the world, it policed the world. Its warships patrolled every major shipping lane. Its admirals made decisions that could make or break the economies of entire nations. Historians call this period the Pax Britannica, the British peace. 100 years, from 1815 to 1914, where Britain sat at the absolute top of the global order, seemingly untouchable, seemingly permanent. But here is what nobody inside that world could see. 3,000 miles to the west, in a young, chaotic, often violent country that most British aristocrats still considered a backwater, something extraordinary was beginning to stir, not in Parliament, not in a palace, but in the mud and smoke of places like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, Ohio, in factories that hadn't existed a decade earlier, in the calloused hands of men who had no family name worth mentioning, no title, no inheritance, just hunger. Something was already changing, and most people in Britain had absolutely no idea. Now, here's where the story gets interesting, because when most people think about America in the 1860s, they picture something powerful, something confident, the land of opportunity, already stretching from coast to coast, already flexing its muscles at the world. That is not what America was. In 1865, America had just finished tearing itself apart. The Civil War had killed over 600,000 people, more American deaths than both world wars combined. Entire cities in the South were rubble. The economy was fractured, the political system was held together with wire and prayer, and the industrial gap between America and Britain was so enormous that most serious economists in London didn't even bother thinking about America as a competitor. Why would they? Britain had a 100-year head start. But here's the thing about head starts. They only matter if the person behind you is running the same race. America wasn't running the same race. America was playing an entirely different game. It started with a simple, almost embarrassing problem. America had too much land and not enough people. And the people it did have were expensive. A factory worker in Massachusetts in 1870 demanded nearly twice the wage of a factory worker in Manchester. For a young industrial nation trying to compete, that should have been a death sentence. But it wasn't, because that one problem, expensive labor, forced American manufacturers to think differently, radically differently. If you can't afford to pay 10 men to do a job, you build a machine that does the job with 2 men. And then you build a better machine that does it with 1. And then you ask yourself, what if the machine didn't need the man at all? That obsession with replacing human labor with mechanical efficiency became the defining characteristic of American industry. Historians call it the American system of manufacturing, and it was built on one revolutionary idea: standardized parts. Before this, every machine, every rifle, every clock was essentially handmade. Individual craftsmen shaped each component by hand, which meant each component was slightly different. If a part broke, you needed the original craftsman to make a new one. It was slow, it was expensive, and it was the only way anyone had ever done it. America broke that system completely. At the Federal Armory in Springfield, Massachusetts, manufacturers began producing rifle parts so precisely uniform that you could take a piece from one rifle and fit it perfectly into any other. No craftsman required, no custom fitting, just identical, interchangeable parts made by machines, assembled by relatively unskilled workers at a speed that handcraft could never match. When British engineers visited American factories in 1853, sent specifically to study what was happening, they went home and wrote a report that stunned Parliament. They said American manufacturers had found a way to make complex products faster, cheaper, and more consistently than anything Britain was doing. They called it, with a mix of admiration and alarm, the American system. Britain read the report, nodded, and went back to doing things the way they'd always done them. That was the first mistake. But standardized parts were just the beginning, because around this same time, a young Scottish immigrant stepped off a boat in Pennsylvania with almost nothing in his pockets and proceeded to build the most powerful steel empire the world had ever seen. His name was Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie had arrived in America as a child, so poor that his first job was as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory, working 12 hours a day for $1.20 a week. He was 13 years old. But Carnegie had something that couldn't be bought, an almost supernatural ability to see where the world was going before anyone else did. In the 1870s, Carnegie visited Britain. He toured the steel mills of Sheffield, the finest in the world at the time. He watched how they worked, he studied their methods, and he came home with a single burning conviction. Everything Britain was doing, he could do faster, bigger, and cheaper in Pennsylvania. He built his first major steel plant outside Pittsburgh in 1875, and from the very first day, he ran it differently than anyone had ever run a steel mill before. He hired chemists, actual scientists, to analyze every batch of steel and find inefficiencies. He tracked the cost of every single process, every hour of every day. He reinvested almost every dollar of profit back into newer, faster equipment. While British steel mill owners were withdrawing profits to fund their country estates and their children's education at Eton, Carnegie was plowing money back into the furnaces. The results were almost incomprehensible. In 1880, Carnegie's mills produced about 10,000 tons of steel rails per year. By 1890, that number had grown to 2 million tons annually, and the cost of producing a ton of steel had dropped from $67 to $11 in just 15 years. Carnegie was making steel so cheaply that British manufacturers couldn't compete even in their own home market, let alone globally. And then Carnegie did something that no British industrialist had ever thought to do. He didn't just make steel, he owned the iron mines that produced the ore. He owned the coal mines that fed the furnaces. He owned the railroads that carried the raw materials to the plant and the finished steel to the ports. Every single step of the process, under one roof, under one man's control. The British steel industry, by contrast, was dozens of separate companies. Mines owned by one family, furnaces by another, railways by a third, each one taking their slice of profit, each one making decisions in their own narrow interest. It was a system built for a slower, gentler era of commerce. Carnegie's system was built for war. And then came the railroads. And this is where the scale of what America was building becomes almost impossible to wrap your head around. In 1850, America had about 9,000 miles of railroad track, a respectable number for a young nation. By 1900, just 50 years later, that number had exploded to 193,000 miles. More railroad track than all of Europe combined, more than Britain, France, Germany, and Russia added together. Think about what that meant in practical terms. A steel mill in Pittsburgh could now get iron ore from Minnesota, coal from West Virginia, and ship finished steel beams to San Francisco, all within days. What had once been isolated regional economies stitched together into a single continental market of 70 million people, all hungry for manufactured goods, all reachable by rail. Britain had an island. America had a continent. And America had just figured out how to use every inch of it. The railroad didn't just move goods, it created an appetite for industry that fed on itself. Railroads needed steel, steel mills needed coal, coal mines needed machinery, machinery needed more steel. Each industry pulled the others forward in an endless cycle of demand that had no equivalent anywhere in the world. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. By 1890, just 25 years after the end of a war that nearly destroyed the country, the United States had surpassed Britain as the world's largest producer of manufactured goods. The country that British economists hadn't bothered to take seriously had quietly, almost invisibly climbed to the top of the industrial world. Britain had invented the game, had written the rules, had played it longer than anyone, and America had simply built a bigger stadium. But winning on factory floors and railroad networks wasn't the whole story, because Britain still held something that no amount of steel or track could immediately replace. It held the money, the banks, the global financial system that the whole world still ran on. And that last fortress of British power, is where the real battle was about to begin. By 1900, Britain knew, not in any official speech, not in any parliament debate, but privately, in the hushed conversations between bankers and industrialists over brandy and cigars in London's private clubs, Britain knew. The numbers were undeniable. America had surpassed them in steel, in coal, in manufacturing, in railroads, In almost every measurable category of industrial output, the student had outgrown the teacher. But Britain still held one card, the most powerful card in the entire deck: money. Not just money, the system of money. The Bank of England, the pound sterling, the global network of loans, debts, and financial relationships that Britain had spent 2 centuries carefully building. Every major government on Earth borrowed in pounds. Every major trade deal was settled in pounds. London wasn't just a financial center, it was the only one that mattered. As long as Britain controlled the money, it controlled the world, and it knew it. Then came 1914, and 4 years later, that card was gone too. When World War I exploded across Europe, Britain entered it as the richest creditor nation on the planet. It was owed money by governments everywhere. Its overseas investments were generating rivers of income every single year. 4 years later, it was the world's biggest debtor. Here is what happened. Modern war isn't fought with courage alone. It is fought with steel, ammunition, food, and oil, everything that an industrial economy can produce at scale. And Britain, for all its financial muscle, couldn't produce enough fast enough. So it turned to the one country that had the factories, the raw materials, and the sheer industrial horsepower to supply an entire war: America. At first, Britain paid cash. Then the cash ran out. So it started selling its overseas investments, liquidating assets built over generations, selling them at whatever price it could get just to keep the guns firing on the Western Front. It sold American railroad stocks. It sold factory holdings. It physically shipped gold reserves across the Atlantic on warships, praying German submarines wouldn't find them. And even if that wasn't enough, it started borrowing, directly from American banks, directly from Wall Street. The most powerful empire in human history, going cap in hand to bankers in New York. By 1918, Britain's national debt had exploded from £650 million to over £7 billion. Nearly half of every tax pound collected for the next decade went straight back out, not to build hospitals or factories, but to pay interest to America. The student wasn't just catching up anymore. The student had become the bank. But Britain made one more decision, one single catastrophic decision that finished the job completely. In 1925, Winston Churchill, serving as Chancellor of the Exchequer, put the pound back on the gold standard at its exact pre-war rate. The idea was to signal that Britain was back, that the pound was as strong as ever, that nothing fundamental had changed. But everything had changed. At that rate, the pound was massively overvalued. British goods became too expensive for the rest of the world to buy overnight. Exports collapsed, factories shut down, unemployment exploded, and the coal industry, the very foundation on which the entire Industrial Revolution had been built, collapsed so completely that over 1 million miners walked off the job simultaneously in 1926. The economist John Maynard Keynes wrote a furious essay called "The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill." He said in plain language that Churchill had just made one of the most self-destructive economic decisions in modern history, that in desperately trying to look strong, Britain had made itself weaker than ever. He was right. Nobody powerful enough to fix it was listening. Then came the Second World War, and if the First War had wounded Britain financially, the second one finished it. By 1941, Britain was so desperate for American weapons and supplies that Roosevelt created Lend-Lease, billions of dollars of equipment shipped to Britain, survival on credit. But buried inside that lifeline were conditions that would quietly dismantle everything Britain had left. America demanded Britain begin tearing down its imperial trade system. The preferential deals that had given British goods privileged access to colonial markets for a century. The price of survival was the empire itself. Britain signed. It had no choice. And then in 1944, in a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, representatives from 44 nations gathered to design the post-war financial world. The British delegation was led by Keynes himself, exhausted, already dying, fighting with everything he had to preserve some fragment of British financial independence. He lost. The new system placed the American dollar not the British pound, at the absolute center of global finance. Every currency pegged to the dollar alone backed by gold. In a single weekend of negotiations in a New Hampshire hotel, the pound lost the status it had held for over a century. Not on a battlefield, not with guns or armies, with fountain pens. And still, even after 2 wars, a broken currency, and a crumbling empire, some in Britain believed the old power could be reclaimed when it truly mattered. 1956 killed that fantasy forever. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, the waterway Britain had controlled for nearly a century, the artery through which most of Europe's oil flowed. Britain secretly plotted with France and Israel to take it back by force. The military operation worked. British paratroopers landed. The canal zone was being retaken. Then Eisenhower made one phone call. He told Britain to stop. And to make sure they understood he was serious, he blocked Britain from emergency IMF funds. Within days, the pound was in free fall. Tens of millions of pounds fled British reserves in a single week. Britain was staring at total currency collapse. Within days, Britain withdrew, completely, humiliatingly. The entire world understood in that moment what had quietly become true over 50 years. Britain was no longer a great power. It was a medium-sized country that had once been one, and it would never again act on the world stage without first asking permission from Washington. The empire that invented the Industrial Revolution, brought to its knees by the very industrial and financial machine it had taught the world to build. So here is the real answer to the question we started with. Britain didn't lose because America was smarter. It didn't lose because Britain made one fatal mistake or fought one wrong war. Britain lost because it invented something, a system of industry, of scale, of mechanical power that was always going to outgrow the small island that created it. America took that system, gave it a continent, gave it unlimited resources, gave it 60 million hungry immigrants who had nothing to lose, and ran it at a scale Britain could never physically match. Britain lit the fire, built the furnace, showed the world how it worked. America just built a bigger one.